I bow to, first of all, the great masters, especially Paramhansa Yogananda ji and my master, Swami Kriyananda ji, who have brought us all together. As we heard from Kalyana ji, the particular ray of the divine that we always call Paramhansa Yogananda ji, we call him Master. It's sweeter than saying Paramhansa Yogananda ji, just to say Master. The particular ray that Master brought into this world was the ray of love. He said of all the divine qualities, of the different divine qualities, of which there are many, he said he particularly radiated three of them: wisdom, joy, and especially love. And he was a Prem Avatar. Tonight we're going to speak about Paramhansa Yogananda, India's messenger to the world. And it's a beautiful topic. I've spent many, many evenings talking about Master, talking about Swamiji, and I'm always grateful for the opportunity to do so. Their life, the gifts that they have brought into this world are absolutely endless. And I want to talk a little bit, in particular this evening, about Master's message and his role as India's messenger to the world. So first of all, if India is going to send a messenger to the world, well, India better have a message that it wants to send, right? Well, India has the most important message of our age. Master said that all illness is due to spiritual ignorance. And everyone can look around and begin a list of what is wrong, how this planet and the people who inhabit it, how they're ill on physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels. And so that illness has one root cause, and that root cause is spiritual ignorance. Now, if there is a message that this world needs more than anything else, it is the message that India has to offer. Because India, as Swamiji so often has said, India is the guru of the world. Of all the nations, India alone has the ancient tradition of Vedic knowledge, of the practice of the techniques of yoga and meditation, which allow from century to century to century, allow the great saints and sages to achieve personal union with God, moksha. And that message of moksha, plus the passing down of that message from generation to generation to generation, is one of India's unique gifts to the world. Now, Yogananda as the messenger of India, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but let me say that Yogananda as the messenger of India to the world brought in an extremely pure way India's ancient tradition. Over the centuries, when there is a tradition that has gone on so long with so many different expressions, and also with, because we are in a changing age, we have come through the age of Kali Yuga, where there's darkness and ignorance and widespread ignorance, then traditions that are high and beautiful and pure sometimes get translated through misunderstanding or lack of understanding into superstition. And so Yogananda ji was able to take that vast knowledge, the Vedic knowledge of India, the traditions of yoga, the traditions of the great saints, and he was able to pick those which were true and enduring, and leave behind those which were temporary and misunderstandings. And so he rephrased, he recategorized India's great mission, great message, and then he took it to the West. Now, if he had a message for the West, that message was contained in this great book. This book is an amazing messenger for India. I don't know if you realize how powerful and how widespread, thank you, how powerful and widespread the message through the autobiography of a yogi has become. All of the great teachers, East and West, who have taught in America, it would be very, very hard to find a single one whose life and message has not been influenced by the autobiography of a yogi. We have a good friend who has written a book called American Veda, which is about the coming of the Vedic knowledge to America. There's a whole chapter in that book on Paramhansa Yogananda ji. But in that book, he points out that every modern teacher in America, whether they're disciples or not, have not only been influenced by this book, but have taken that book and given it to others. How many in this room have read this book? The majority. How many in this room who have read it, that was your first contact with Yogananda? Many, many, maybe half of the room you can't see, but I can see from here. This is true over and over throughout the world. Devi ji and I have the privilege and blessing to travel around the world, whether we're talking about India or America or Europe or Russia or South America or Mexico. This book has been the emissary, the message of India's great knowledge to the world. In this book are contained the great truths of India. First of all, that God exists. Now, that may seem obvious to this audience. I mean, of course. But as we travel around, we see around the world a growing delusion of atheism that is growing. People saying, well, God doesn't exist. And if someone tries to say, well, yes, he does, they say, oh, that's just a superstitious belief pattern. Well, what answer can we give to saying that religion is superstition? If someone comes and says, I have experienced God, I'm not talking from book learning, I'm not talking from belief systems, I'm talking from my own experience. If someone comes who is powerful and who is so magnetic and essentially denotes the truth of what he's talking about, and he says, I have seen God, I know God, then what can you do? How can you argue with that? So this book, one of the great messages is that God exists. A second great message is that each person not only can find God, but the destiny of everyone on this planet is that they will, at some time, reunite with God because we have all come from God. That's one of the messages of this book. Another message of this book, which is the emissary of India, so these are messages of India that are being sent around the world, is that God is not found just by belief. God is not found by superstition. God is not found by ritual. God is found by experience. And that experience is a science, a science of knowledge that is just as precise and just as powerful, in fact, more precise and more powerful than what we think of as the physical sciences, as physics, as medicine, as biology, and all of these methods are methods of trying to find truth, of trying to find reality, of trying to understand what truth is, what this world is made of. But the physical sciences, at this stage at least, can only explore the physical world. No matter how precise the instruments become, no matter how sensitive and far-ranging they become, at this point, physical science can only explore the limitations of the physical world. But the great saints have seen that the world that is the physical world is a tiny part of the reality of the totality of it. Sri Yukteswar, the guru of Paramhansa Yogananda, said that the physical world hangs like a little basket underneath the great hot air balloon of the astral world. And the astral world is a tiny part of a greater world than that, the causal world. But without becoming too esoteric, the point here is that the scientists are studying and looking for truth, and they're valuable explorers of this world on behalf of all of us. But only at the fringe of modern day science is there the acceptance and the discoveries that this world behind the physical world is a world of consciousness. And without exploring that world of consciousness, we will never get to the understanding of the greater reality that lies beyond this physical world. And it is India's gift, through its great masters, not alone, I won't say that it's India's gift alone, but India has clarified it most powerfully as a gift for the world, the understanding and the knowledge and the techniques that bring that knowledge, so that the scientist of consciousness, who is the saint, who is the person who has united their consciousness with God, they are the scientists of consciousness. And when they bring their message into the world of the physical plane, that message becomes the curative for the ills that are brought about by ignorance, by spiritual ignorance. And so India's message to the world is contained in this book. If I were a doctor and someone called up and was complaining of a fever of spiritual ignorance, like a doctor on the physical plane, at least in America, there's a kind of catchphrase, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. So a metaphysical doctor should say, read 2 chapters from the autobiography and call me in the morning. Because that dose of spiritual knowledge will cure the ignorance that is causing whatever the imbalance is. So this great message went out. But Yogananda didn't write this book until relatively late in his time in America. This didn't come out until 1946. And he came to America in 1920. But who was this emissary? Who was this messenger that was bringing India's message to the world? It wasn't just by chance that he happened to get the idea, oh, gee, it sounds like a good idea, I'll go to America and do some teaching. It was long foretold that he was going to play this role. The great Mahavatar Babaji, who is immortal, he's actually an incarnation of Krishna. And so he's immortal, lives in Himalayas still in bodily form. He told Lahiri Mahashaya, the masters of this world, who come again and again and again at times of world change and world need, they incarnate in order to bring uplifting consciousness, to bring light into darkness. He foretold many, many decades before Yogananda was born that a disciple would be sent who would bring this teaching to America. Now, why America? Why choose that country? In fact, Yogananda said that in this age, India and America were going to work together for the upliftment of the whole of mankind on the planet. He said that America, of all countries, manifests material efficiency, lifestyle. We can do things, we can get things done, we can have fast highways and fast cars and good businesses and all of that. But that alone does not bring happiness. He said that there would be a marriage between India, the great spiritual knowledge of India, and the material efficiency of America. And he said, in fact, there would be many Indians born in America in order to help bring about the Vedic teachings in that country. And Devi ji and I definitely feel like we're Indian souls incarnated in America in a material plane. And he said that many American souls will be born in India to bring about material efficiency. I don't know whether you've noticed that there are any malls around Gurgaon and this area. Looks just like America, I'll tell you. So the American souls are coming here and helping to bring material efficiency. But the marriage of those two together has the potential of creating a better world than what we have had up until this time. And another factor is that both America and India were strongly influenced by England. We all speak English. If I were perhaps Devi and I were going to give a lecture in China, there would be a translator here. Or in Europe, there would be a translator here. But in India, we can speak English. Well, that seems like, so what? But do you know that Yogananda ji incarnated as William the Conqueror in England in 1066, which began the era toward modern England? And so see what long, long rhythms are planned. That's why I say that Yogananda ji didn't just happen to come to America. He started training back before America existed. Training. He didn't need training. He started that mission long before it became obvious. And so he was long foredestined to bring these teachings, these great teachings, to America. So on behalf of India, on behalf of these masters, he came to America in 1920. And after 2 or 3 years as he was getting settled in, then he began his public mission. And what a public mission it was. He went from city to city to city, all the major cities of America, New York and Chicago and Atlanta and Philadelphia and Seattle and Portland and San Francisco and Los Angeles. He went from city to city to city, and he began giving lectures, but not just lectures, he began giving classes. He would go to a city and he would stay at that city for maybe a month in the beginning. And he would give 2 or 3 lectures a day. He would give classes. He would give newspaper interviews. He would meet with people. He was churning the ether. He was bringing these teachings powerfully into the mindscape of this new country that was hungry at this time to receive them. And not just a few people received them. He spoke to the largest audiences possible in all of these major cities. He would speak to 5,000 or 6,000 people at a time, and then there would be lines of more thousands waiting who couldn't get into the lecture hall where he was giving them. He was the most popular speaker of his day throughout America. He was befriended by presidents, by Hollywood people, by famous people. He's still befriended by people who are part of the Beatles. Steve Jobs, who recently passed away, but who was the great innovator for Apple. He had on his iPad one single book. That book was the autobiography of a yogi. At his funeral, he asked that everybody who attend be given a copy of the autobiography of a yogi. And so Yogananda's message is still going on, but in the 1920s and 1930s, it went on and on and on. He went from city to city with such energy and such power that America became aware not just of Yogananda, but of yoga. Because that knowledge, that term, was not yet known in America. And so what Yogananda brought from India to America was yoga, not just the physical postures, but yoga, the true yoga of union with God. And that's what this autobiography of a yogi is filled with. So for a long time, from 1920 up until 1946, it was primarily through lectures and through a few books, but nothing like the popularity of this book. But you know, his first book in America, his first book, in fact, was The Science of Religion. Because he wanted to show not only was religious scientific, but he wanted to also bring about a union between science and spirituality. And he said things which in his day were outrageous. People thought he was either mad or that he was just talking poetically. He said, for instance, when you meditate and you see the light at the spiritual eye, the kutastha, during meditation, that changes the cells of your brain. At the time, not only did they think that nothing like that could change the cells of the brain, they thought the brain got frozen and couldn't change. And so it just seemed like, as I say, either madness or superstition. Now, in our present day, many, this is just one of many examples, but many things that Yogananda said that seemed strange or outrageous are now being proved by science. We know now that when you meditate, it changes the cells of your brain, that the prefrontal lobes get bigger and they get more active, and the more primitive parts of your brain become less active so that you don't have fears, you don't have anxieties, you don't have the same kind of reactive anger. The Dalai Lama said that if every 8-year-old in the world were taught to meditate, war would be done within a generation. So the curing of spiritual ignorance is what was started by this great avatar. So when this book was published, the autobiography of a yogi, that really sent the message out. And you know what happened as a result of that lighthouse of energy going out into the darkness? It called to him the emissaries that would carry on that work. Swami Kriyananda, perhaps foremost of those disciples who read this autobiography, and that was the calling card of Yogananda that awakened him and brought him to the Master's feet. And he was trained in, as Sri Kartikayanji so graciously talked about. He wrote books, he sang music, he spoke languages, he gave thousands of lectures to carry on as the emissary of India's emissary. And then he trained many of us, and we are still carrying that on. Now, none of us have our own message that we're trying to propagate. All of it comes from Master. And Swamiji did not have his own message that was separate from his Master's. He simply wanted to continue and help complete his Master's message. I'll end with this, that one other thing that Yogananda brought, one other piece of knowledge that he brought, was that God is everywhere and is for everyone. That means that we don't have to leave our jobs, leave the cities. We don't have to leave Noida and go to the Himalayas in order to find God. Strange though it may seem, God is right here in Noida. And if we can't find him here in Noida, we can't find him in the Himalayas either. If we can't find him in our jobs, in our families, in our relationships, in our entertainment, we can't find him by running away from all of that. God is everywhere, and we must look for him on the very spot that we stand at this moment. And so, Master brought techniques, especially Kriya Yoga, the technique of ultimate meditation, to help us to do that. But as one of the ways that we are trying to also say that God, we being Ananda, say that God is everywhere and is for everyone, is that we have householders, men, women, young, old. It doesn't matter who you are, what you do, what your station in life is. If you love God, that's all that matters. If you seek God, if you're a devotee, if you're someone who is willing to put in the discipline that is required in order to part the veils of ignorance, then it doesn't matter who you are, what you do, or where you live, or, as Kalyaniji, Dr. Kalyaniji said, the color of your skin, or your age, or anything else. The heart throbs and is waiting for God's presence, and if we open our hearts, God is already there. Thank you.
It is a joy for me also to be able to share with you about our great Guru this evening. And if truth be told, for my whole adult life, this is what Jyotishji and I have been doing. When we speak of Master as India's messenger to the world, I think it's helpful to ask the question, who sent the messenger? And Jyotish has been speaking some of this, but in Autobiography of a Yogi, and this book, I must say, I'll digress just a moment here, this book is a living reality. I have read it first time 1969, probably every year after that, but every time I read it, I find a section that wasn't there before. I said, wait, this must be a different version of the book. I never saw that before. But the mystery of this book, it is self-revealing. As if you are open to the inspiration and the subtle truths contained in it, then you will see them. If you're reading it superficially or with a distracted mind, a closed heart, it's just words. Many people read the book and it's just words. They put it down. But it can be a living reality. So who sent this messenger? We read in Autobiography the wonderful chapter with an important title, Babaji, Yogi Christ of Modern India. That simple phrase, Yogi Christ. No one's ever used that phrase before. But what Master was saying with that is that Christ is a state of consciousness, cosmic consciousness, and the same truths that Jesus taught in the West, the Yogi Christs of India have been teaching throughout the East for time immemorial. So this great Yogi Christ Babaji, he communes in the Himalayas in his physical body with the Christ of the West, who has no body at this time. And they plan, it tells us in Autobiography of a Yogi, the redemption of humanity in this age. And so there are great powers going on, great architects of human history. Swamiji told us, Master confided to the direct disciples, that it was Babaji who put the thought during the Second World War, put the thought in Hitler's mind to divide his armies, half in Europe, half to Russia. And that was what broke those armies, because they couldn't sustain that effort. They spread their forces too thin. And so these great masters of East and West, Yogi Christs, have foretold, have designed the redemption of humanity in our age. And in 1894, Master's Guru, Sri Yukteswar, came to Allahabad to the Kumbh Mela, and he was a very jnanic yogi. And he was looking at all the crowds and the hubbub of the Kumbh Mela, and his thoughts were somewhat critical. And he said, surely the scientists working in the West to help humanity are more pleasing than all these sadhus thinking only about what goes in their begging bowl. And just at that moment, someone came up to Sri Yukteswar and said, a saint is calling you. And Sri Yukteswar said, who is it? And the man said, come see for yourself. And he did. And who was it but the Yogi Christ Babaji, even though he veiled that thought from Sri Yukteswar's mind. And he said to him, I could see your interest in the West. Years hence, I will send you a disciple for your training to disseminate these great truths in the West. And as we were saying, this was Master. And yet this was hidden from him as well. And then one day, as Master knelt at Sri Yukteswar's feet and asked him, did you ever meet the great Yogi Christ Babaji? And he said, yes. And for the first time, he recounted that story about meeting Babaji in Allahabad and him saying, I will send you a disciple. And Sri Yukteswar turned to Master and said, you are that disciple. And so this great drama has been written. Why? For our benefit, for the redemption of mankind. And this great book, Autobiography of a Yogi, I can't tell you, as Jyotish was saying, we go around the world and people said, I read that book, it changed my life. We have some friends, a dear friend who now lives in Boston, who was originally from Moscow, and she was yearning for, this was in the communist era, yearning for spiritual teachings. And she went to a gathering of some friends, and she noticed a man, and she just was drawn to him, and she went, and they spoke a little bit, because at this time it was a jail sentence to be reading anything of a religious context. And the man told her, "Come to my house, there's something I want to give you." And he gave her a copy that had been hand-copied, handwritten in Russian, translated from Autobiography of a Yogi. And she kept it under her bed. She read it, and finally she and her husband and daughter made their way to America, found Ananda Sangha, and she said, that book was my lifeline in the darkness of communist Russia. And I knew I was at great peril to even have it. But this book, for many years, I have used it in a very personal way. Whenever I was in doubt, whenever I had a question, whenever I had confusion in my mind, I would open this book 3 times at random, and I can't tell you the exact answer to my prayer, to my question, to my doubt, to my worry. It was there as though it had been written specifically to answer my question. So it is a living reality. But what I get every time I open the book, what is the message of Autobiography of a Yogi? It is a message of hope. And these words reverberate again and again through story after story, through teaching after teaching. And what kind of hope are we speaking about? It's on a very basic level, the hope that God will provide our practical, physical needs. In the marvelous chapter, 2 Penniless Boys in Vrindavan, Master's elder brother gives him, who was living in Agra, gives him the challenge. You think your God will take care of you practically. You should not be a worthless, wandering sadhu. You should get a job. And Master, just a young boy then, said, God will provide everything I need. And his elder brother Ananda said, very well, I give you a challenge, you and this God of yours. I challenge you and your friend, to Jitendra, to go to Vrindavan with not 1 rupee. And I will buy your railway ticket there, but you must not miss 1 meal. You must see all the sights of Vrindavan, and then take the train home and return before midnight. And Yogananda said, I accept this challenge. Do you think, I see some of my friends from Vrindavan, God bless you. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's a joy to see you. So nice to see you. And as you've read the story, every one of the requirements that Brother Ananta set was fulfilled in the most amazing ways. They returned home before midnight with a roll of rupee notes and threw it on the table. And in that night, the elder brother became the younger brother Mukunda's disciple. He said, your God does provide the practical needs. This book provides hope that the anguish and the loss of the human heart will be soothed, will be responded to. When Master lost his beloved mother when he was 12 years old, he wanted to throw himself under a train. He thought he couldn't live without his mother. And he prayed and he wept and he was in anguish for many years. Then one evening he was praying in his little meditation room and he said, Mother, I cannot live without reassurance of your presence. And he felt the voice of the Divine Mother, who we are worshiping now in the 9-day holiday. And she said to him, always have I loved thee, ever shall I love thee. I have loved you through the eyes of many mothers, through incarnation after incarnation. And in this life I came to you in this form. but I am always with you. And in that moment, all the anguish of his heart, the pain and the loss, was totally healed. So the autobiography gives us hope that on a human level, God cares about our suffering. He isn't just off somewhere thinking, oh, you poor people here, what difference does it make? It's all delusion if you lose your loved one. God doesn't feel that way. He cares about our losses. And this is the hope that the autobiography brings us. It is also the hope of our spiritual yearning. Master then grew some years, but all his life he was seeking his guru. He was seeking his guide to the infinite. And he tried here and there, but nothing satisfied him. And then one day he sat in his meditation room in Calcutta. This was in Varanasi. And he was praying. He said, and I prayed till I felt my brain would burst. And then he heard a womanly voice, seeming coming from nowhere and everywhere. And she said, your master cometh today. And that day he met in the narrow lane, Serpentine Lane. He met for the first time in this lifetime his guru, Sri Yukteswar, who trained him for the next 10 years for this mission he had to the West. And so the yearnings of our heart, sometimes people say, well, God doesn't listen to your prayers. You can cry to him, but what good does it do? Hope, eternal, springs from the pages of this book. Every prayer is answered. Maybe not in the way we think, maybe not in the time we expect, but the yearnings of our heart are always answered. And Master shows us this again and again. And he gives us hope also for our own salvation. Because all of us, whether you think, oh, I'm not a spiritual person, I have a family, I have a job, I yelled at my neighbor. Master said, the time for knowing God has come. He didn't say maybe in a couple of generations. He said, that is why I came. That is my message of hope. That suffering humanity can, through these techniques of meditation, Kriya Yoga, Guru Kripa, Guru's grace, that we can find God. Don't think you're not worthy. If you have a beating heart in your breast, you are worthy. You are worthy to find God. You are worthy to follow a spiritual path. Just place one foot in front of the other and reach out for your Guru's hand, and we can find it. And the hope, maybe the most important hope of all, that comes from the pages, is that our planet, humanity, which seems so lost now, as Sri Kartikeyanji was saying, with the religious animosity and violence, political upheaval, corruption, illness, we can go on and on. But this is not the last word, even in our lifetime. We don't need to think, well, maybe some generations from now, they'll clean up the pollution in NCR. It can happen much quicker than that. Because these great yogi Christs have created techniques and sent messengers into the world so that we can find universal brotherhood, as Kalyaniji said, our oneness under the one Father of God. This is the reality. If no one is separate from our heart's concern, if no one, that person, if we never think, I don't need to concern about that religion or that country because they're different from me. No one is different from you. We are all one in God. And these great messengers give us this hope. And I want to just conclude by a beautiful passage. Bear with me, I'll read. It's less than a page. But Master speaking, the messenger to the world. speaking about his mission. So he was sitting towards the end of his life in California, and he was in San Diego at the time, and one of his followers asked him the question, "Tell me truly, Paramhansa Ji, has it been worth it?" He gazed at me with earnest sincerity. I understood his laconic question. Have you been happy in America? What about the delusionments, the heartaches, the center leaders who could not lead, the students who could not be taught? And Master replies, "Blessed is the man who the Lord doth test. He has remembered me now and then to put a burden on me." Master goes on, "I thought then of all the faithful ones, of the love and devotion and understanding that lay in the heart of America." With slow emphasis, I went on, but my answer is yes, 1,000 times yes. It has been worthwhile. It has been a constant inspiration, more than I ever dreamed, to see West and East brought closer in the only lasting bond, which is spiritual. Silently, I added a prayer. May Babaji and Sri Teshwarji feel that I have done my part, not disappointing the high hope in which they sent me forth.